Welcome to the Pure Passion Podcast with Dr. David Kyle Foster. This podcast and our many other resources are made possible by our donors. Please support this ministry by going to our website, masteringlife.org.
Welcome to Pure Passion. This is David Kyle Foster. I'm your host for today's program. So glad you tuned in. Today we have a special guest again for the second time in just a couple of weeks. But he's got a topic to talk about today that is just heartrending and important for us all to hear. What do you do with the death of a child, especially someone who's really not yet an adult? It's just devastating. I remember friends of mine, Joe and Mary and Alan, had a gay son, and he was murdered by his gay lover. And they're still not over it. In fact, Marion told me she'll never be over it. Right. But God is showing her little by little how to heal. And then I had a pastor, Steve Berger, at Grace Chapel in Franklin, Tennessee, and his son was killed in a car wreck. He ended up writing a book about it, but he's still not over it. And it's now 15 years later. It really does something to you, doesn't it, Stephen?
It does. And, I remember, in the early years, especially after year two, you would have people come to you and say, well, how are you doing? Are you over it? The reality is when you have the death of a child, especially someone you've really invested in. Now, Robin and I have had a miscarriage before, but when you have a child that you have invested many years in, an adult child, and that takes place, the shattered dreams, it's not something you get over. It's something you have to live with, a new norm. And I liken it unto amputation, really. And I didn't understand it, the first few years. Charity passed away. Actually, what was ironic is we were in the middle of a controversy with a network of ministries. And the very day I took a national stand was the night that my daughter entered into the hospital, and she died the next day. And my faith was so tested. Yeah. And so you're crushed. And so the picture of amputation is like you have these phantom places of almost what I call a place of great anguish in your soul, especially the first few years. Yeah. And it's like the phantom pain that never goes away. People that have lost a limb or even a sense, it's like there's this connection to something that should be, and it's not there. And so when someone has lost somebody, and it can be true of also a spouse, but there's something beautiful in sacrificial parental love. I think that's why God sent his only begotten son. Is the idea is parental love is very, very sacrificial. And it's so easy to want to die for your child. And you would think it would be true with spouses, but I've met some couples and you're going, not so true. But with a child, for sure, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so very, very painful. And you have to live a new way of really submitting your life, your feelings, your thoughts, your anguish, your grief needs to be turned into mourning. And there's a difference between grief and mourning.
What is it?
And in that anguish, you learn how to mourn and bring it out, then you're blessed. Your state is grief, your state is shock, but blessed are they that mourn. And so in the anguish, in the amputation, those are some things that I learned within the first couple of years. And some people didn't like me mourning, and I'm an extrovert. My wife's an introvert. Now she mourned differently. And there were some people that were very put off by my mourning. But David, I'm telling you, if I hadn't, I think I'd be a basket case. I don't know that I would have ever got healing if I hadn't mourned.
I can't believe somebody would give you grief over mourning for your child who has died. That's just Unbelievable. This world has really gotten messed up.
Well, it's bad when it comes out of the church too,
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
thinking, wow, brother or sister, you just don't know. It's a maturity issue, as it is when we walk with Jesus. The walk and the way of the Lord has a cross, like you wrote in your book, The Transformation of the Inner Man. The Saint John of the Cross. The dark night of the soul. And what does that mean? What does it look like to really go through something like that?
yeah.
And then you're changed by it forever.
Well, let's get down to the question. Surely you approached God and said, why? Why did you let this happen? Talk about that process and how you came out with an answer if you did.
Well, in my particular circumstance was very, very difficult.
How old was she?
But Charity, we had she's 21.
21.
And she'd only been married for almost 19 months. And she had an 8-month little boy. They got pregnant a few weeks after the honeymoon. And she was not expecting to do that, but God did that and gave us a lovely grandson. We have her son, Gabriel, who's 10 years old. But in the middle of that, when it happened the way it happened for me, I just knew that God had it all in control, right? My faith wasn't wavering. I was standing against this antinomianistic thing. I was so sure of God's care that there was no way Charity was going to die. And it was right after Easter weekend, and I just knew, that in my soul, I had also, because I'd had 7 other family members die with the Exodus debacle, I was really grieving over what was happening. And so I was really studying heaven. And I had been studying the theology of heaven and near-death experiences at that time. And so even the doctors thought, I think you might be having a nervous breakdown, because honestly, I had so much faith, believing that Charity was going to not die, or if she did die, she was going to raise from the dead. I believed it. I mean, people thought I was crazy, but I kind of had a joy up until the funeral. And then it all became real. She's gone. And then the question was, okay, I don't even understand this. Why? Yeah. Why have you allowed this to happen? And honestly, David, that question, why, was not settled with me. And I totally still don't have the full answer why, ever. But the kindness of God and his love towards my soul, each year, it kept getting better and better and better and more soothing in knowing that something did happen and something is still happening, is that through Charity's death, our whole family got turned upside down. My other children, her siblings, their lives were turned upside down. Every single one of us were faced with eternity, and it changed every single one of us. In some ways, negatively. We had to learn, and are still learning, how to come out on the other side of that. But the specific question, why, God, did you do this? He hasn't completely answered, but he has told me that he is good and that he has a plan. And so the challenge has been, will you trust me? Yeah. And I realized I didn't trust him as deeply as I thought I trusted him, David.
I can believe that. Yeah, I can believe that. Well, it's the question, it's one of the top questions in the world. Why does God allow things to happen that seem bad to relatively good people? I mean, nobody is good but God, Jesus said, but relatively good people. Why would they have to go through? Well, Job, I guess, is a good answer. He had his whole family die. And I think one of the minor prophets, it might be Obadiah or one of those, that book is on why does God allow evil to happen to good people. So there's some thoughts there. But I remember asking God one night, the big question of my life was, why does God allow children to be raped and sexually molested? How could a good God even allow that? And he never gave me a straight answer. It's almost like that question is meant to be unanswered to try our faith, so that our faith can be tried and made deeper. But as you experienced, long process, isn't it?
It is. And, we have the promise in Peter's epistle that, that through these trials, our faith becomes like gold. And there's this little saying during that time. I never wanted to study the book of Job, because I thought, if I study the book of Job, things like Job may happen. And now I've been kind of living a Job-esque life, right? And not quite at the level as he, but I've had lots of betrayal and lots of difficulty and lots of pain and loss. And what I have come to learn about some of these things is how God uses them to change you. And in changing you, he brings glory and honor to himself. Mm-hmm. And he reveals, our neediness in it. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I do remember I was in utter anguish. It was about 3 weeks after Charity passed. And another friend of ours, Chad Arendt, sent me this Job, the film by John Piper film. It's the book, kind of flipping through the book. But I remember just being crushed by it because of the conversation that God had with Job from chapters 39 to the end. And it was, who are you going to question me? Yeah. And I remember literally
God said that to Job.
Yes. Yeah. And God said to Job, okay, you're going to gird yourself up like a man now, and you're going to ask me, and I'm going to answer you. And when he did, Job came out on the other side of that and was just crushed by the gloriousness of who he was. Well, that same thing happened to me. And I remember I had been crying so much. You can cry to where it almost comes out white. Really? And like wax. And I was in so much anguish. Gotcha. And I remember walking outside and there was this burn pile. We lived on some property, and some guys had come out and they had burned some stuff. And there was this ash heap in my backyard. And I know this is really crazy, but this really happened. And God led me outside, and it was a beautiful Saturday morning, I remember, and it was just beautiful. And there wasn't any wind blowing, which is unusual for Oklahoma. And I saw that ash heap, and all I felt was this anguish of being crushed by the weightiness of who God is. And then I kept asking why. Matter of fact, I was like demanding that he tell me why. And he was like saying nothing. And David, in the most amazing thing that happened, I felt so crushed. I looked at those ashes. I literally went headlong and fell into the ashes. And I was laying there in the ashes, and I thought, I just want to die. I just want to die. Please let me die. And my wife was worried I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But God did something. He didn't answer why, but all of a sudden, this presence came over me, and it was like this whirling of the Holy Spirit over me. Gosh. And all of a sudden, for a couple of days, the anguish went away. And it was like, I felt like the Lord was saying, I'm crushing you. I'm changing you. Trust me. And I've never gotten over that. And, God doesn't always do that for everybody, but he did that little thing. But then he was silent for a year. I didn't hear anything from him for a whole year. Yeah. And my faith was so tested in that time. Dark night of the soul. Yeah. And I knew in my soul that I had to just keep worshiping, thanking him, and realizing, just like Job came to an understanding, You are the one that loosens the belt of Orion. You are the one that made every, giant fish in the sea. You are the one that created DNA. You are the one that has created everything. Who am I? And I got that revelation, and honestly, it's changed me, changed my life. It's changed my life. To this day, I'm changed by it.
Well, I remember asking God one day, why don't you just put heaven up in the sky? People will see it. They'll be drawn to you. They'll, you'll get so many more followers that way. That's what I said to him. And he said back to me, if I put heaven in the sky, people would follow me for that and not for me. And I think part of the answer to what's going on in these situations is that he's refining our motivation. He's testing how true is our faith? How committed are we really? Do we really believe he's good? Oswald Chambers once said that the core of all sin is the doubt that God is good. And that's what drives us into rebellion. And that's what Satan put into the minds of Adam and Eve. Now, let me give a coda to the story I told about asking God about why he lets bad things happen to children in particular, whether it be molestation or dying or cancer or whatever. And he did say to me about why children are molested. He said, what you're really asking me is, why did I allow you to be molested? How could I love you and let that happen to you? And I said, yeah, Lord, I mean, you nailed it. That's really what I'm asking. And he said to me, look at the cross. And when the cross becomes enough proof to you that I love you, then you're going to find the freedom you're looking for. And that revelation just transformed my thinking on these big questions about why, the Holocaust, how, why on earth, and things like that. So tell us more about what you went through, what the healing process was like. And...
Well, that is so well said, because, one of the things in my own course, I had that experience when I saw my little boy at 6 years old, John, take a picture of him at 6 and me at 6, and we looked so similar. And I remember having that moment where I was so angry that it actually was the first year of ministry here. So, 32 years ago. And I was so upset by this, God, you allowed that to happen to me. And the reality is that God took me into the place of the pictures of like what we see in The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson's movie. And I think it's one of the most powerful things. I was raised Catholic, and so I had some of those visuals, growing up. But Mel Gibson's movie, the Passion of the Christ, and realizing that brutality. So David, I had the same kind of God moment with him, in that he spoke to me about sin and how horrible sin is. And the reality that because there is sin, that he is busy about maneuvering things, right? So that on Judgment Day, your testing, my testing, and many of the other saints' testings in every generation will prove that he is good, he is God, he is holy, he is love. And those that do end up in hell, they are without excuse. And because he is that, he's not willing that any should perish. And he's so awesome and loving. And that's one of the revelations that I have been getting from this mind that he has, like my dog, or a beautiful animal, or something in creation. It just changes me when I think about the intricacy of the mind of God. And now I don't question him, like I want to question his character. I don't do that. So that has really shifted because of the cross, because of these experiences in great sorrow, that has, I think, even culminated to what is going to happen in the last part of my life. And I'm not even sure what that is yet. But these last days, I think, are going to be more fruitful.
Yeah.
And, statistically, they say some of your most fruitful years are your 60s and 70s. And I'm like, I wouldn't have ever believed that. But actually, I think it might be.
Yeah.
And that God will allow there to be a more fruitfulness based upon, this wisdom, right? My hair used to be black and now it's gray. And the reality that he is doing a work, even in the midst of these things, that it's kind of an exciting journey. And the real revelation that this life truly is only but a vapor.
Yeah.
And knowing that in context, it shifts you to want to live for the eternal things.
Mm-hmm.
And since Charity's death, that has really changed Robin and I. And I think it's trying to get a hold of my kids. I think with some of my kids, I have a 40-year-old daughter and a 33-year-old son, almost 34-year-old. I mean, it's really challenged them to live for eternity. And some of even Charity's friends and her, her husband. And so, God does a work of grace. That in itself is grace, right?
Well, we only have a couple of minutes left, so I want to get this question in. How did your wife handle this differently from you, and how did the children handle it differently, and what do you think the reasons are for the difference?
Well, certainly the personality types. I needed to emote and be out. Robin needed to find the shelter of being alone with God. And as an introvert, she turned in to God. And I wouldn't say all of it was perfectly healthy. Some of it, she just couldn't stand to be around people that would make her emote. And she finds an introverted people in their emoting, that is a very holy and private thing for them. For us extroverts, it's our way of being able to find freedom, right? And even solace in it, the comfort of it. And so that was really big. Also, my children, I think, were challenged with their own, and still are, with their faith in God. And so the final chapter is still being written on that. And even with her husband went through a very difficult time, back and forth, and trying to figure out how he's going to raise this little boy. The love of his life is just, and it still is. Charity was the love of his life. And that, for him just seems so unfair. And so for him, he's also really drawing near to the Lord and learning how to navigate life in that place of surrender, right? Like we talked about earlier about sanctification. And so that is really taking place. And I believe with all my heart that one of the promises I have is that I shall see all of my children in the land of the living. And that means eternity, and staying faithful in intercession. And so I trust him with that.
That's the ultimate help, is to have a vision of that, seeing them in eternity and knowing that you're going to join them for all of eternity sort of helps, doesn't it?
It really does. And, Robin's miscarriage and even an abortion, we have other children in heaven. Before Robin and I married her, she was forced to get an abortion, and she talks about that. But, the reality is in eternity that Charity has siblings there and other family members, and the gloriousness of what happens in heaven. And if we would just get a revelation of heaven and who heaven's light is, Jesus is what makes heaven heaven, and realizing who he is, and that changes everything for everybody.
The marriage is finally consummated in heaven. That's the ultimate of marriage, the ultimate destiny of everyone who will accept Jesus Christ as their Savior. Well, Stephen, you need to write a book on this topic. The insights you've gained is going to help a lot of people on this program, as well as those who are going to read your book on the topic. So I really encourage you to do that. I want to thank you all for viewing and listening. This is Pure Passion. Our guest has been Stephen Black, the director of First Stone Ministries in Oklahoma City, and he's soon to be a new author on the subject of losing a child in this life and what that all does to you and what it all means. I hope this has really ministered to you. This is our prayer. This is what we want to see. We want to see Jesus, and we want to see him in you. So until next time, I'm David Kyle Foster. God bless.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Remember, much of Dr. Foster's teaching has been taken from his new book entitled Sexual Healing Reference Edition, available at our website, masteringlife.org. This podcast and our many other resources are available because of our donors. If you are one of them, thank you. If you would like to join in supporting us, please visit masteringlife.org.